was able to take advantage of all the chaos that happened in Week 13 between Indiana, Ole Miss, and Alabama all losing, and now they are in great position within that 12-team format. Paige Dowert, Jimmy Himes. I know we like to say never, but Jimmy, you have a never say never isn't going to happen kind of moment when it comes to who Tennessee might face once everything is said and done.
Yeah, in the college football playoff, whatever the bracket, I know that they came out with, these are the projections now, obviously. We haven't had the conference championship games to determine things, but they have Tennessee playing at Georgia. That ain't happening. There's no way that's going to happen. First off, if Georgia wins the SEC, they then move into one of the top 4 slots with a bid.
Yeah.
A bye, I'm sorry. And if Georgia loses, then that's a third loss. And I'm convinced they would fall behind Tennessee because this committee clearly values one-loss record more than it does strength of schedule. Mm-hmm. So even when Georgia had the number 1 strength of schedule a couple weeks ago, they were like 12th. I mean, they were like barely.
They were on the bubble.
So that tells me if Georgia has a third loss, they're going to fall behind Tennessee. So there's no way Tennessee's going to go to Georgia. And I don't think there's any way Tennessee plays Georgia in the playoffs anyway.
Yeah.
Because of that third loss, if Georgia has that. So it's a projection right now. And if you're a Tennessee fan, don't get too worried about having to go back to Athens because that ain't happening.
Yes. Well, because you really consider it, whether they win, like you mentioned, and they get the bye, or they lose, they're the third loss on the season, and they might be just totally out of it, which is kind of the concerning aspect of these conference title games, that if it is your third loss, or maybe even if it's your second, but it's a loss in an extra game that only a handful of teams are playing, that loss is still like incredibly significant and could just take Georgia out of it. So it kind of brings us to Lane Kiffin when he says the quiet part out loud. Are these conference title games still worth the risk, you think?
There's 2 ways to look at that. And I do think Georgia would still get in the playoffs with the third loss. I just think they would be like the last team in.
Sure.
Here's another way to look at that. Let's say Texas A&M, which has 3 losses, beats Texas, plays in the conference championship game, and loses to Georgia. Okay, so they're out with 4 losses. But they could, if they beat Georgia, they're in with 3 losses.
Yeah.
So the SEC championship game would mean a whole lot to Texas A&M given that scenario. It would mean a whole lot to Georgia, I think, if Georgia won it and they got that first round bye. So it would be very valuable to win your conference championship, in particular in the SEC. But it could be risky, as Lane Kiffin talked about. You might get knocked out of the college football playoffs with that loss. Now, the committee has said we value teams that make their conference championship. You didn't say we're guaranteeing them a spot.
Yes.
We're just saying we value them. So that has left the door open for perhaps taking a team that plays for a conference championship and eliminating them from the playoffs.
It's also really interesting to think about, too. It's just like if you win, the road gets a lot easier. But in Georgia's instance, if they lose their first round playoff game at home.
Right.
So they play an extra game, and then they go on the road. So their run to the national title becomes that much harder after playing an extra game and then not even getting to start at home anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So that would be tough for Georgia. Is Georgia good enough to handle that? I'm not sure. They've had a few hiccups along the way. But Georgia seems to play, for the most part, they seem to play their best game against the best competition. So we'll see. But, yes, that definitely makes the road to the national championship much harder. If you play in that SEC championship game, then you turn around and have to play a first-round game on the road. So in the playoffs, you got to win 3 games to get to the national championship game. That would be tough for the Bulldogs.
A week ago, Tennessee was not in control of its own destiny. Then you had the chaos. They had a really great game against UTEP. They got their bounce-back kind of win against El Paso. And then now, heading into the Vanderbilt game, seems like they're controlling their own destiny once again.
They do. They win and they're in. That's a guarantee. There's no way they're going to be eliminated if they beat Vanderbilt. The only question then would be, where do you get seeded? Now, and the seeding could be determined by what does everybody else do. For example, if Georgia wins the SEC championship, they move into the bye spot, and then that would move Tennessee probably up a spot. I've got to wonder if Georgia ends up beating Texas, let's say, for the SEC title, and Texas has another loss on their schedule. Does Tennessee move ahead of them? I don't know. And then there are other games out there. What happens to SMU if they lose? And, of course, they're behind Tennessee right now. If SMU beats Miami in the ACC title game, then does Miami stay ahead of Tennessee? There's so much that we don't know that's going to unfold, which kind of makes it exciting.
Yeah.
And by the way, I'm not giving Miami the Syracuse game.
No.
They go to the Carrier Dome. That's a tough place to play. Syracuse has a hot quarterback. It's going to be difficult for them. So we've mentioned for several weeks, this isn't going to go by chalk. No. There are going to be upsets, and typically there are more upsets in November because there's more at stake, and there's more opportunity to choke. Yes. And we saw a whole bunch of that last weekend.
And then when I did a poll getting ready for the Tennessee-Vanderbilt game as they get ready for this huge rivalry game against the Commodores, which I don't think we would have said in recent years at all that this in-state rivalry is in fact a big-time rivalry. But this season, when Vanderbilt has 6 wins on the season, they were averaged to just have about 2.5. This game feels a little bit different, and I did a poll on our YouTube channel about maybe people's concern level. And interestingly enough, we had a number of people who said that they were a little bit worried heading into this game. 22% say they're a little worried, but 37 and 41% say they're confident or very confident. Where are you on that spectrum?
If you're Tennessee, you're going to be a little bit worried. I mean, look at all the upsets that occurred last week. Who would have thought Florida would beat Ole Miss and Oklahoma would beat Alabama? And even Auburn beating Texas A&M. So in the SEC only, you had a number of upsets that occurred. I would be worried. Now I'll say this: if Tennessee can play a clean game, I expect Tennessee to win. Mm-hmm. But that means a clean game to me: no turnovers, limit penalties, no drop passes. Well, this year they've had a lot of penalties, they've dropped a lot of passes, and they've had turnovers. Mm-hmm. So, but if you can eliminate those, you are better than Vanderbilt. But if you don't eliminate those and Vanderbilt stays in the game, look out. I mean, Vanderbilt was good enough to beat Alabama. Yes. They were good enough to play Texas to a field goal game. Yep. They lost by 7 in Baton Rouge last week at night. That's a tough place to play. Yeah. So they are a dangerous team. Now, on the flip side of that, they were bad enough to lose to Georgia State and bad enough to get blown out by South Carolina. Yes. I expect Tennessee to get the best version of Vanderbilt. Mm-hmm. But if Tennessee plays the best version of Tennessee, Tennessee will win.
And I think this is a big game when the tickets aren't $20, but they're like $200, $300, $400.
Yes.
I think that reflects kind of everything that's at stake, and then maybe even indicates that Vanderbilt might have a couple of fans in the stands this go around as compared to years past. But when you look at everything that's on the table for Tennessee, and they're heading into maybe I guess you could call it another emotional game or just theoretically a big stage kind of a game because we know Vanderbilt doesn't have a huge stadium. Are you confident or concerned that Tennessee will be able to stay focused like they've been preaching all week?
Absolutely. I would be shocked if they're not. What was the terminology from Josh Heupel? Laser focused?
Yes, yeah.
You know what's at stake. Mm-hmm. And so I can't imagine you not being completely focused and geared up to play this game. And look, Vanderbilt's kind of been the little brother to Tennessee through the years. So I would be shocked if Tennessee's not laser focused. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to play great. Yeah. Because you could be focused and still have a turnover. Mm-hmm. You could be focused and still have a holding penalty. Or, well, I'm not going to say jump off sides. If you do that, you're not focused.
Yes.
And they've been doing that too much. But I do think Tennessee will be focused. There's no way you overlook Vanderbilt. There's no way you're not ready to play. Yeah. And so Tennessee should be able to take care of business. I think they're favored by about 10 points.
Yeah, 10, 11 points.
That sounds about right to me. Mm-hmm. But if you mess around and have a few penalties or turnovers early in that game, and Vanderbilt takes the lead or Vanderbilt gets confident, now you start doubting yourself a little bit. Yeah. And that's where the concern would come in. So I think if you jump on Vanderbilt early, I think it's going to be very difficult for Vanderbilt to rally and beat you.
Speaking of Vanderbilt rallying, I think this is, for Vanderbilt, as a team that really rides on momentum or that quick start that they've often been able to find. And I think how the first couple of opening drives start for this game could really go a long way in dictating the outcome of the game. So how much are you focusing on how Tennessee, specifically on offense, is able to start in this game?
I think that's a huge point. I think if you get off to a good start and you cast them down in Vanderbilt and you build some confidence, I think that would mean a whole lot in this game. Vanderbilt opened the LSU game with a 63-yard touchdown pass. You can't do that if you're Tennessee. You can't allow that. They also have a pretty feisty quarterback that believes in himself and his team. Yeah. And the team believes in him. Therefore, the team believes in itself, that they believe they can beat Tennessee, which going into some games, they kind of hoped it. Yeah. Or going into some games, it was like, let's keep this thing close. And sometimes they couldn't do it. Yeah. But this is a different version of Vanderbilt. So I do think getting off to a good start is paramount. I know against UTEP, Tennessee didn't do that in the first quarter.
Right.
Nico was off target. He was 2 out of 6 for 14 yards. Then he went 11 out of 12. Well, you'd like that 11 out of 12 to be in the first quarter, not the second quarter, if he can do that. But I do think that's going to be a big part of this game. And I think, and also for Tennessee to just be calm. Don't, if something happens bad, don't panic. Vanderbilt's going to make some plays. They made some plays against LSU. They've made plays against pretty much everybody they've played. So they're going to, at some point, they're going to have some momentum. The key is to remain calm and turn that momentum back in your favor.
And that's kind of exactly what Dylan Sampson said as well when I asked him, like, hey, there's all this outside noise against Georgia. You said the team didn't really hone in on the details. So how are you, one, staying focused, and are you focusing on details any differently than this week? And he's like, everyone in the building knows this is a playoff game. So once you kind of get that out of your head, you have to know that you're not supposed to go out there and, like, do anything crazy. Just, as Josh Heupel says, do the ordinary things at a high level. And I really do think that Tennessee staying to the basics and doing what they do well will be more than enough to go and beat Vanderbilt. But like you mentioned, with Diego Pavia and Clark Lee in his fourth season at the helm, this is a Vanderbilt team unlike any year probably prior to it. So the idea of Tennessee needing to focus on the details and focus on Tennessee solely is a massive angle to this game.
Yeah, it is. This is the best Vanderbilt team since James Franklin was there. He was able to get some 9-win seasons at Vanderbilt, which is remarkable. The other thing that's remarkable, I read this, that this is only the 4th year that Tennessee and Vanderbilt have both been bowl eligible the same year.
Isn't that incredible?
Yeah, 1974, 1982, 2016.
Yeah.
Those are the years. Now, it said bowl eligible, and I wonder if it also meant just getting to a bowl, because there weren't as many bowls back in 1974. But still, that's an incredible stat. But this is a different Vanderbilt team. It is their best team probably in about 8 or 9 years.
Easily.
And what's interesting is that how did they get it turned around? Well, they turned to that football power New Mexico State.
Yes.
And got a coach from there, and they got players from there, and they got a quarterback from there, they got a running back from New Mexico State. And that's what's helped turn this program around. I would have never thought that's where you would go in the transfer portal to revive your program, but that's what's happened. So with Tennessee, it's just a matter of playing up to your ability. And if you do that, but I'll say this too, if you can't beat Vanderbilt, you don't belong in the college football playoff, right? You don't. They're a 500 team. They're 6-5, right? So if you can't beat them with the stakes that you know are on the table, you shouldn't go to the 12-team playoff.
Yeah, I saw an interesting stat just with how much Tennessee could make if they make it to the college football playoff, and it's like, for Josh Heupel in Tennessee, this is a $10 million game against Vanderbilt.
Is that right?
Yeah, just to get in the
playoff?
Yeah, from what you'll make in concessions, what you'll make from just getting a bid in the playoffs. It's like $7 or so million if Tennessee can get a win here and then be in the college football playoff. So there's plenty riding on this game to keep them motivated. But I think if you look at the other side, maybe where Diego Pavia and that offense maybe causes a little bit of worry for Tennessee's defense is also how they utilize the tight end. He's another mobile quarterback in Pavia. And they mentioned how he's kind of like an option quarterback as well, which Tennessee's defensive lineman, Jason Jenkins, says they've not really seen that all season. So when you also compare that to Georgia, where they maybe threw in some wrinkles that they weren't expecting and then didn't do too well against those new wrinkles, are you concerned when they're facing a Vanderbilt team that maybe operates their offense in a way they don't usually see? Do you think they'll be prepared for stuff they don't usually see?
Well, I don't know. We've seen several teams throw some different looks at Tennessee with their offense. We saw Mississippi State with a whole lot of shifts and movement. They ran for 179 yards. Yes. Kentucky ran for 168.
Yep.
And then Georgia also threw in more motion and threw the ball a lot to the tight end. Carson Beck played his best game of the year against Tennessee. Tennessee helped him by not putting any pressure on him. That was a part of it.
Blitzing, yeah.
But he had his best game of the year. When I look at the Tennessee-Georgia game, I just looked at Georgia was a better team. Now, I also thought it was the worst game Tennessee's defense has played all year.
Yes. It was an uncharacteristic night off.
It was, and I don't expect that against Vanderbilt. No. I think that was an outlier. But I also look at Tennessee. Look, they were tied. They led the game. They were tied 17-0 at halftime. They were down by a touchdown with 3 minutes left. I mean, they were in the game. Now, to be honest with you, in the fourth quarter, I didn't think they'd win it, but they were still in it. So, but I just think Georgia was a better team. And I think that Tennessee will be focused. I think they understand the stakes. I don't think it's oh gosh, if I don't make this 4-foot putt, I'm all nervous. I don't think they'll go into it that way. I think that they understand what's there. They know they're the better team. They should be confident. Tennessee does not. They average less than 24 points a game in SEC games, which is a little bit of a concern. I'm gonna see this a little differently from Jenkins. Pavia is not the only mobile quarterback Tennessee will have faced.
No, it's like every quarterback they faced this season's been mobile.
Yeah, Milroe was mobile.
Taylor Green.
And then the quarterback that came in. Now Jackson Arnold's pretty mobile, but then the quarterback Oklahoma brought in, I think his name was Hawkins.
Yes.
He was pretty darn mobile too.
Michael Hawkins, I think.
Yeah. So they have faced mobile quarterbacks. So do I expect them Vanderbilt to run some option and rollout passes? I do.
Yeah.
And that's what. Vanderbilt's one of the best teams in the SEC on third down conversions. They weren't very good against LSU on third downs, but they're one of the best teams in the league. They were close to 50% on third downs entering the LSU game. So that's going to be an important element, an important stat for Tennessee to get off the field and not allow Vanderbilt to convert on third down.
How important do you think it'll be for Nico Imaliava and the wide receivers to have more passing plays that stretch the field and aren't these quick screen plays? How important will maybe that aspect be to the game where not necessarily you're finding these explosive plays, but you're at least stretching the field more vertically with those types of passes?
I don't know that it's that important to hit vertical 30 and 40-yard passes.
Right.
I think it's very important to hit, like the first play against UTEP was a slant to squirrel wide.
Yep.
Hit that. That's about a 15 or 20-yard pass. And maybe he runs to the end zone after that. But you've got to hit those intermediate passes too. Because the deep balls can be difficult to complete, right?
Right.
But you can't miss them if you're the quarterback throwing it. You can't drop them if you're the receiver. But if you hit some of those routes, I think that can loosen up a defense also. Yeah. And so, and the way Tennessee spreads the field, Vanderbilt is not very good on pass defense. They give up, it's close to 240 yards a game.
Right, yeah.
You would expect Tennessee to have success in the air, provided they execute. And if you hit some throws against them, you would theoretically open up the run game. I think Dylan Sampson
Dylan Sampson, yeah.
I think he could have a field day against
yeah.
Vanderbilt. In particular, if Tennessee is able to get something going in the passing game, whether it's a fade route, whether it's a crossing pattern, whether it's a post, anything just to get going. Again, that 11 of 12 that Nico had against UTEP, where he was so precise in the second quarter, if you can have him start the game that way, I don't see Vanderbilt beating Tennessee.
Yeah, because, I mean, you just look at how Tennessee, from Nico's vantage point, has performed this season. As soon as Nico's comfortable, usually it's game over for the other team.
Yeah. And he needs to find that. And I don't know, I've heard this, and you hear this from some quarterbacks. He's so amped up at the start of the game that he's overthrowing or missing receivers.
It's a little high,
yeah. And so if he can just be calmed down a little bit, maybe Tennessee should pregame tackle him.
Just get it out
Hit
of
him
the
a couple
way.
of times. Yeah. Get the jitters out.
Yeah.
But if he can start the game fast, but I don't. Vanderbilt's run defense is okay.
Yeah.
It's not special. So I think Dylan Sampson could have a big game. But if Tennessee's passing game is way off, and Vanderbilt can stack the line of scrimmage, that can make it tough on the run game. It can make it tough overall on the offense.
Okay, so I want one key for you that you think could maybe flip this game. I'm going to go with Boo Carter on special teams. I think I see a punt return for a touchdown in his future against Vanderbilt, and I think that will just bust the game wide open because the second he hits like a 20-plus yard return, the stadium comes alive, and then the offense is just absolutely juiced when they get on the field. So I'm going to say one punt return for a touchdown for Boo Carter will be a sneaky key to the game. Do you have anything of sorts?
What if his punt returns sets up a touchdown?
Hey, that's just as
he
good.
runs it
It's
to
done
the
that a couple
9-yard
of times.
line. Would you take that?
Yeah, I'll take that. As long as they can punch it in, I'll take that.
Yeah, and look, he's been electrifying as a punt returner, hasn't he? Had a 38-yarder against UTEP. He had another one for 20-something yards.
Yep.
So he's been really good in that area. If I had to pick one stat that I think is going to be the most important in this game, it's going to be the third downs.
Sure.
Stopping Vanderbilt on third down and you converting. Now, the other thing that could be very important, too, is red zone scoring.
Yeah.
Tennessee has struggled in that this year, but against UTEP, they were 8 for 8. But that could be another element. But to me, at the end of the game, if I see Vanderbilt 3 out of 12 on, 3 out of 12 on third downs, and Tennessee's 7 out of 12, Tennessee's going to win the game.
Yeah, I love that. All right, well, that's our keys to the game ahead of the Tennessee-Vanderbilt game. We'll be back Sunday for a post-game report, and hopefully Tennessee's still keeping its spot in the college football playoffs, which Jimmy says is a sure thing. We will meet back on Wednesday when we hear from Tennessee football as well. So Sunday and Wednesday are our next football podcast. We'll talk to you then.